I was always eating with the mache, and it got to a stage where I didn't like my parents' Western food very much at all.
Backlane eating was considered low class in the early 50s, frowned upon by the Europeans.
Because of the diseases prevalent at that time, I think yellow fever, typhoid, cholera, because of the unhygienic conditions existing, my parents, particularly my father, absolutely forbade me to eat that hawker food.
Ronnie Pinsler was born in Singapore and into a European lifestyle. In the 50s, the worlds didn't mix. It was a white world, white lifestyle.
My parents were coming from Romania, so they would have, I suppose, continental dishes. Meat dishes were very common, steaks, lamb. There would be some eating of pork, but not much. I'm just trying to remember. I think they made an attempt later on to get into curries. Fish and chips was very common. It was mostly fairly bland food. I think butter was a rarity in the 1950s because I actually grew up not being used to eating butter with my bread. I think this came later. I think it was to do with refrigeration. I'm not sure if I'm wrong on this, but of course there was always cold storage, but I think it's when the refrigerators only became reliable that you could keep butter in the house. So maybe butter was something for the kids of the 1960s or the very late 50s, but not the early ones.
Joining their world were two domestic help, a mache and a cook.
Cookie is the person employed to do the cooking in the house, the cook boy, you could say. I mean, there's an unpleasant term to address a servant as boy in the old days at Cologne. So we either call him by his name, in which his real name was Akyat, but I would call him Cookie during my childhood. And then there was, first Achung was the Cantonese mache. Chung actually traveled with us to Europe, to Italy, in the 50s. And then she left, and then Ato came with Cookie, I think around about 1956.
The daily routine of marketing was done by the domestic help. Specialty items, however, were hand-picked.
There were specialists that existed in Beach Road that actually supplied, upon request, things like halva, olives, even I think items like salami. Once a month the shipments would come in and the tauke would give a call, and then we'd go along and pick up our supplies. When I say we, I mean my father and his partner and other Romanian family members, because I had cousins too. There were 6 of us children.
Between the East and West Divide, a connection was made through food. Hainanese men had a reputation for being good with Western cuisine, and in time, the group would help to change our food culture. In the 50s, however, they remained mostly in personal households and trusted with cooking suitably for a Western palate.
Cookie, I believe, was a Hainanese, so he did have a cooking background. There would be a lot of big dinners at home, and Cookie would prepare. So sometimes other family members would lend their helpers along, so the cookies of other households would come over and help with the cookout. Basically, it was left to the devices of the cooks.
Within this milieu of cultural mix, clear food boundaries still existed. The domestics ate their own food, and a child was forced to make decisions.
And of course, I was always eating with the mache, and it got to a stage where I didn't like my parents' Western food very much at all, which I don't think made them very happy, because my parents were traveling a lot at that time, so she took her charge, 3 years old, 4 years old, in the very early 1950s, to a village in Changi. We might be there for 3 days in the village, and it would be for a deity's birthday, like Tau Pekong or Kuan Im's birthday, something like that. There would be the wayang, and the one food that I remember that I particularly liked and always could not have enough of was the what I think is called tawa, soya bean curd with the cane sugar, that I still like up to today. And every time I have it, I do have these flashbacks into the past.
The story of Amache is full of contrasts, looking after children but remaining single, living among wealth but poor, surrounded by family but dying alone. Their hope was to return to China, but when the time came, many spent their final moments in the death houses of Chinatown.